And we're live. Hello, everyone. We are back with another exciting workshop. I am Hadia Malik, and I thank you all for being a part of this workshop. Everyone who's joined in from Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, a very, very warm welcome. I'd also like to take a moment and thank you all for the outpour of love and support on our pre seed funding news announcement. Thank you so much for all the messages, mentions, and signups. With the same love and support, we will keep on reaching new heights. So, thank you for that. For everyone who's joined us for the first time, I'd like to share a bit about the Qureos platform. Qureos is a platform where we are on a mission to transform 100 million careers by having apprentices get bite-sized learning from experienced mentors and then put you through together with projects where you can apply your learned concepts. On the platform, currently we have a lot of cohorts and workshops coming up, and also many new exciting learning streams that are in the pipeline. If you want to accelerate your learning journey, be a part of Qureos by signing up at www.qureos.com. Also, join our Slack tribe to interact with future market leaders and the stellar mentor community. We'd love to see you there and interact one on one with all of you. The link for the Slack tribe is going to be mentioned in the comments section. Today, talking about this particular workshop at hand, we will be talking about getting ready for the plunge, where we discuss a checklist for the would be entrepreneur. We've been lucky enough to have with us Raul Escalante deliver this workshop for all of us. A very brief sort of introduction of Raul is that he is an entrepreneur and intrapreneur from Mexico with extensive experience in the public and private sectors and academia. He is passionate about what makes teams consistently great, whether it be in youth sports, banking, academic research, or other endeavors. Apart from teaching at ITAM and Monterrey Tech in Mexico and facilitating for the Stanford GSB's online lead certificate, his main professional role is head of partnerships for the Carbon Company. He holds a BS in economics from ITAM, an MBA from Stanford, and he's a father of two. Rahul, thank you so much for being a part of this workshop. We're extremely lucky to have you here.
Thank you, Hadia, very much. Thank you. Hadia, do I share like we did before, or are the slides up?
Yeah.
Oh, you have to do the controls, right?
Yeah. Let me just, I just want to mention one thing and then hand it over to you.
Okay, great.
Great. Sure. So before I hand it over to Raul, I just want to mention to all the participants that are joining in, you all are free to share your questions in the chat box. We'd be happy to hear from you all, suggestions, comments, questions, anything that you have. The session is also going to be recorded and you will all be able to access it later as well. So I think with this, I will hand it over to you, Raul. So take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Hadia. So, good afternoon in Europe and the Gulf and in South Asia. Good morning here in the Americas. I am now in Mexico City. As Hadia mentioned, my name is Raul Escalante. I am, again, as Hadia mentioned, an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur and intrapreneur who has worked in the public sector, in the private sector, launching startups, also in starting new programs on entrepreneurship at universities with varying degrees of success. And as Hadia mentioned, I've been teaching at the three major universities, private universities here in Mexico, and I'm part of the mentoring program for ITAM, which is the university that I graduated from a long time ago, literally the last century. What isn't in my biography is my history in entrepreneuring, and basically, since the year since 1999, I've been working in different capacities on incubation of companies, mentoring entrepreneurs, being an entrepreneur myself. And so basically, the story that I'm going to tell right now over the next hour and the conversation that we are going to have is a lot about the reality of starting a company, and not necessarily what you read on Fast Company or on Forbes or on TechCrunch, but more of the gritty day-to-day relationships and the importance of making those decisions that allow you to be more successful as a person and as an entrepreneur, because I think the two go hand in hand. And so with that, I think I'll just start. And so this is the class that I wish I had taken, or perhaps it's the class that I wish I'd remembered from taking at Stanford. I arrived in 1998 at Palo Alto, fresh faced from the Finance Ministry of Mexico. And that is one of the least entrepreneurial places to be in this hemisphere. Perhaps people from South Asia who have lots of dealings with their governments will understand what I'm talking about. My office literally had a lot of responsibility in killing many ideas, and that was part of my job. So I arrived in Silicon Valley not really knowing what Silicon Valley was about. I arrived with expectations of what it meant to be an entrepreneur, or the wish that to become independent, as something that was sort of mysterious and out there, but I didn't really know what the atmosphere in Silicon Valley, and how that is some what I call a belly button of the world, one of those apexes around which the world turns. And the flavor at the time was Jerry Yang. He was sort of the Elon Musk of in 1998. I mean, Elon Musk without the attitude, but still, Yahoo had recently IPO'd, and all the talk was of this Stanford grad who was making it big and really being successful with Yahoo. And what in the first week of the first quarter, I was taking a train down the peninsula from Belmont, where I was staying at the time before on-campus housing was, and across the seat from me was an Asian American, young Asian American man. He must have been around 20, maybe 19, and he was typing away at his laptop, which I guess now would be just, normal, but at the time, there weren't that many laptops, and they were cumbersome, and their batteries lasted for about half an hour or so. So this guy was really typing hard on his computer, and I suddenly thought to myself, wow, this guy could be like the next Jerry Yang. And then, this wave that absolutely took me away, that I suddenly said to myself, well, maybe he isn't the next Jerry Yang. Maybe I am the next Jerry Yang, or the person who was next to me riding in the train with me was the next Jerry Yang. And it was at that moment that the idea that individuals can actually change the world just hit me, and it was a paradigm shift. And from that moment onwards, I started falling in love with the idea of entrepreneurship in the technology sense, in the sense of startups that can grow to scale globally in a couple of years. And this may sound naive to you. It may sound a little even hokey, as they say in the US, but that was my personal story, and a little of where this presentation and the talk that I'm going to give comes from. And if you relate to that, if you can think of that moment when you thought, okay, this is something that I could perhaps really dedicate my life to doing, then I hope this resonates with you. So I started falling in love with entrepreneurship, specialized on business incubation. The web back then was just 3-4 years old, in a common place way. And when I graduated, I decided to jump into the ring right at the moment that the dot-com bubble was bursting all around me, which was probably a bad decision to make. But anyway, so this is where I come from, and this is what we're going to go through right now. Is a part of the learning journey that I made, and I'm going to use a framework. As a framework, I'm going to use a checklist. So I started back then wanting to be an entrepreneur, a would-be entrepreneur, and I had this checklist of points that I really needed to tick off to make sure that I could really get going and start changing the world. And the first question there, I had taken these organizational behavior classes, and I thought, okay, so am I ready to start a company? I think that's the first question. I have to do some introspection and make sure that I'm ready to start a company. Secondly, do I have a team to start a company with? Some people that can work with me, that will understand what I'm driving at, that who will take what we're doing together, run with things. Do I have a team that I can build around me to execute this? Third, are we all focused on scaling? I mean, because starting a small business, a small consultancy firm is completely different to the idea of starting a company that is going to expand and that is going to revolutionize an industry or disintermediate an industry or whatever. But we need to be focused on scaling. And fourth and final, do we know where to find resources? I was working off of the idea that entrepreneurship is, the science of pursuing opportunity with resources that you don't necessarily have, so you have to go out and find them. So the big question for me was, do I know where to find these resources, and are they accessible to me? So, spoiler alert, these turned out to be the wrong questions. These things that sounded reasonable to me at the time are, for the reasons that we're going to go over in the next 45 minutes or so, were the wrong questions. So let's start with the first one. Am I ready? Am I ready has now become transformed into, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to do this to myself? Do I really want my family to go through this again? And this is the relevant question that I have to make. And in order to get the best answer possible to it, it's really important to have a different kind of introspection to what I thought before. The first thing that I really want you to do, that I recommend highly that you do, and it's something that I've done in the past year once again, is try to find what my current purpose, my real purpose, what really satisfies me, what makes me get up in the morning, day after day, be motivated through thick and thin. Okay, and as a part of that, defining what success means to me personally. So what I recommend here that you do is that you write this out on paper, pen and paper, if that's what does it for you. I recommend pen and paper because you can, the exercise of actually scratching out and rewriting makes you think harder than if you just type it out on a computer, where it feels sort of more trivial. Write it out, and then once you have a statement in a single paragraph, take it to the people who know you best. Take it to those people and ask, is this me? Do you think this is a purpose that I reflect? Is this going to make me happy? And by success, some people have defined success as earning a lot of money. Some people define success as having a lot of impact on a business or an industry or a community. Some people define success as getting recognition. So here again, every single person is going to have a different answer to this, and the answer to this is going to change over your lifetime. Life is actually quite long in this respect. You go through different phases, and as you go through them, your definition of success and even your purpose does shift in time. So just finding out what that is the first question that you need to answer if you want to consider starting a company. Secondly, will you enjoy it? And a lot of factors feed into whether you are going to enjoy it. And the first is your attitude towards ambiguity. Being an entrepreneur, especially at the early stages, involves a lot of ambiguity. There, you don't exactly know what industry you're going to be working on for the next few years. You have an idea, you probably have a prototype, you probably have a first version, a minimum viable product, but you don't really know where you're going to end. And this even translates into the structure of your day. Sometimes you don't have routines anymore. You go from the routine of checking in at work, logging onto your computer, checking your email for specific things, and looking at your different projects that you're executing and so forth. You go from that to practically having to build everything from scratch yourself without much structure. So if this keeps you up at night, then you probably need to go out there, put yourself out of your comfort zone, and then come back to the idea of starting a company. Secondly, you're risking a lot when you're starting a company, and the first and most important thing that you are risking, you're putting at risk, is time. So how do you feel about, for example, finding out that you lost a whole year of your life? Of course, you'll have gained a lot of lessons, in the same way that if you go to if you find yourself in a desert island for a year, you will have learned, how to feed yourself in the wild and that sort of thing. But still, you will have lost a year of opportunities in your professional career. You will have lost a lot of revenue or income for yourself and your family, savings perhaps. And if losing a year is totally fine with you, think about what happens if you lose 3 years instead of just a single year. Is that going to be catastrophic? Right? Again, these are all questions that go to the larger question of whether you really want to do this at this particular stage in your life. What happens when you fail? What happens when you have a lot of success? There are pitfalls in both, because when the impact of what Qureos is going through right now, when they've raised their first significant amount of money, $3 million, the first time you have that high, it really go through the roof in a way that isn't necessarily good for you, because it'll make you lose focus, and it'll make you lose the ground, and sometimes it'll stop people from having down-to-earth conversations, listening to their clients from day to day. And sometimes, people just lose the floor. And the same thing happens to the lows. First time you get an email saying that your service seriously affected somebody else. The first time that you hear that a new company is copying what you're doing and setting up across the street and targeting your same clients, you feel a lot of anxiety. And at the end of the day, again, those things are all relative. Even in the worst cases where they really go after your clients and you really, when you really are affected in your company, even then, even in those cases, the low feels a lot harder when you're in the driver's seat of a company than it really is over time. So again, managing those lows, managing the highs, managing the lows, being a little impervious to those things is an important part of being able to enjoy the entrepreneurial journey that you're making. The third big question is, how does this venture fit into your life story? Are you going to be the sort of person who, really builds a company over 10, 20, 30 years? Or are you a more, like myself, more of a serial entrepreneur? You're there for the start. You get all of the adrenaline rushes. You get to shape the company, and you get to make the tough calls and tough decisions. But, once the processes really start working out, you don't feel that you fit there anymore. And so, decide what the story of your life looks like, at least as a default. And think about how this venture that you're planning, or the kind of venture that you're planning, fits into that life story. So having these decisions all adds into the question of whether you really want to start a company and dedicate your professional career to this. Third, fourth, are the resources that you are going to be needing, are they at hand, reasonably at hand? Or are you going to spend like 3 years in the desert looking for the first batch of funding? And finally, having a backup plan and a personal reserve is super, super, super important. I can't stress how crucial this is. And this was my biggest mistake when I set up my first entrepreneurial ventures is, I was sort of one of those romantics who thinks that you should burn the ships. You shouldn't have an alternative because that increases your commitment. I think that we have an expression in Spanish that says that entrepreneurs should die at the foot of their cannon, and that's just basically stupid. I think that entrepreneurs who die at the foot of their cannon are dead entrepreneurs because everybody fails at one time or another in life. So it's really important to have a backup plan and to have something to fall back on. That makes it difficult for certain kinds of people, especially from less well-to-do families. Of course, that's just the basic reality. But there are different decisions that you can make. Instead of going into a very high-risk venture for your first company, you can perhaps do something that is a little safer, closer to home, less ambitious. Okay? But being able to fall back on something, whether it be a professional career, whether it be a temporary job at a university, and so forth, that is super important, and it'll give you a lot more resolve. It'll make you feel safer. And I think most importantly, if you already have a family, if you already have children, this is the sort of thing that will make you your relationship to your partner last longer. Okay, so takeaway: starting a company isn't for everyone, at least not in every stage of their life. Again, you change over time, your purpose shifts, but you can certainly work to get better at this, to increase your chances as an individual of starting a company and being successful there. Okay, so first question shifted from am I ready, which you never really are ready, to do I really want to do this? Again, to myself and to my family. So what happens to the second question? Do I have a team? And if you're very critical, or at least you have this touchy-feely background like I do, you will probably have noticed that when I discussed the do I have a team question, it was all focused on me, the entrepreneur. And the real question is, am I part of a crew yet? Even though there are solo entrepreneurs, and even though some solo entrepreneurs are super successful, I strongly believe that starting a company is a team sport, and being a part of a crew, a real crew, a crew that shares commitment, is a huge part of being successful. So belonging to a crew is a second big point on my checklist. Okay, and the first thing you want to know there is, who are your partners on the journey, and the reasons that you are on this journey, are they compatible to each other? Do they match? So for example, if somebody is in a company for the money, which is a perfectly legitimate reason to be there, and another person is in the company or the venture because of the impact that you're going to have, and a third person is there for the recognition that they're going to be getting and having their name on Entrepreneur or on Wired or other publications. If all of these three people are on the same team, then that team is very likely going to be running into conflict at one point or another. And I mean, not necessarily the kind of conflict that you can actually make be productive. Mismatches in between the partners on the journey are something that is one of the largest pitfalls. And when you start, you go down to the reason that you're starting a company, and you start digging into, for example, what your expectations of each of you are for the roles that you are going to be playing. Some people like to have a single role that they can focus on. Some people don't mind having 20 roles, which is probably going to be necessary at the beginning of a company. What are the expectations around the ownership of the company, and how much money you'll be making, at least during the first year or until you raise your first $1 million in funding. Again, the life story. Does one person want to be in the company a year and another 10 years? You don't necessarily have to be on the same page, but it's really, really important. I can't stress how important it is that all of you know what page each of you is on along these things. So having these conversations is what starts shaping a group of people into a crew. And simply because you can find out that you're not really compatible to each other, even though you're friends, even if you grew up together, perhaps that person isn't the right person to be there with you on that journey, on that specific journey at this particular time in your lives. Another thing that I have found, and this has been my personal experience, being similarly resilient is super important again. And I've seen this in my own personal case. I've seen this in the case of companies of other of good friends of mine, that some of the people in the company are very gritty. They can take a lot of adversity and they can remain focused on their long-term goals, and others simply aren't. And this sometimes is a question of their personality, but also sometimes, and less romantically, it's simply a question of whether they have the resources to be able to go through a very rough patch and how long that patch can be. So having this match in your resiliency, and if you aren't equally resilient or similarly resilient, finding ways to compensate this is again something really important, that to in order that you be able to convert a group of people who have a common purpose into a crew that is going to be working in a very coordinated fashion through the highs, through the lows, and being able to work better in time. Final point, and this is sort of what happens, because you're not going to be able to, in your conversations, you're not going to be able to foresee all of the scenarios that are going to actually play out. You are going to have a lot of conflict. Having conflict is part of nature, part of life, and definitely part of starting a company and being an entrepreneur. So how do you as a team manage conflict? First question, what happens when things go south? What happens when you lose a client, somebody makes a mistake? Are you the kind of people who start, and when I say the kind of people, I mean in your team, are you the kind of people who start pointing fingers, or are you the kind who is the first person to analyze their own actions and say, okay, so I I made this mistake, and this is what I'm learning about this, and this is the reason I made that mistake, and this is what I'm going to do to fix it and to avoid it in the future. Okay. And that, I think, and knowing that about the people that you're working with and being comfortable with that is one of the most important factors to building cohesion within an entrepreneurial team. Secondly, do we hit below the belt? We quarrel, we have strong discussions. Sometimes we even have shouting matches, but there's a certain level of respect that some people are very sensitive about keeping. And some people, especially, and this is funny because I found it. I have one brother that I grew up with, and I have a couple of other brothers. So for me, fighting was something that we did every day, and there were very clear things that we knew. You never hit the face, you never hit below the belt. We can slug it out, but at the same time, there are certain rules that we don't break. And single children often have this problem that because they didn't grow up fighting every single day of their lives, they sort of, don't have these rules. And sometimes that can be a problem. So get those rules out there in place and say, okay, so this is off limits. Now, again, we often break the rules. And what happens when we break the rules? Do we forgive? Are we the kind of people in the group who are able to forgive and move on? And moving on is the second part of forgiving. Or, a year from now, is this mistake that we made and that was supposed to be forgiven, will that crop up again in the discussions, in the conversations? And will I be getting hell for what I did right now, today, even though we said that we'd been forgiven for this? So again, having this clarity of vision about the people that we're working with is very important. And making sure that you have the conversations to realize whether the team members that you are working with are reasonably aligned. You don't have to be on exactly the same page as everybody else, but you do have to know what your crew members are about, and to be comfortable with this. A final point that as I was showering this very early morning, I was thinking, and that I didn't put here, and this is something that in developing countries like Mexico, like many of the places where I assume the audience is from right now. This is something that is super important, and being aligned on issues of diversity is again vital. Um, it's a big pitfall in this presentation that diversity isn't mentioned explicitly, because it's something that I feel very strongly about. Uh, Diversity and managing diversity, which isn't easy, by the way. It isn't easy having different people with different backgrounds, with different beliefs on the same team. But managing that successfully is a huge boost to being successful, because it'll make you make better decisions. It'll help you really dig into some issues that would normally be complete blind spots to different people. And when I mean diversity, I mean social diversity, economic diversity, diversity of gender, diversity even of sexual and racial on racial dimensions. Those things are very, very valuable in getting a team that really works well, that makes good decisions, and again, that can help you through some really rough patches. Most entrepreneurs are male, but conventional wisdom out there, and there's a few surveys, and there's significant research that demonstrates, for example, that women are more successful entrepreneurs in terms of achieving higher rates of growth, in terms of generating more revenue, in terms of generating more jobs. So, for example, as a male, do I feel comfortable being completely open with a female member? Do I mind if that person is my boss? Do I mind working with somebody from the LGBTQ community? And, these issues would, some people would say, okay, so, within my crew, it doesn't really make a difference. But you know what? It really, in the long run, it does end up, especially because capital markets and the kinds of people who are going to be financing you as a startup really are people who take this seriously. Obviously, there's exceptions, but down the line, these are issues that are going to be taken up. Okay, so that's it on being part of a real crew. And again, do I have a team? As a question in my checklist became, do I belong in a crew yet? Do I personally belong in that crew? I may be the CEO, but I am an integral part of that crew. So what the third question, are we focused on scaling? Now that becomes, are we focused on these two acronyms? And they look like the names of a Welsh village, but they really stand for something else. So what happens with early stage ventures is that these early stage ventures, when you're just starting a company, it's an adventure and exploration. You really don't know what's out there. And you're probably aware that there is a lot of stuff that you don't know about. So what you don't know is what WYDK means. And you're probably aware that you don't know a lot. But I can assure you that there is, even though you're aware of that, there is a lot that you don't realize that you don't know about. And these things are what, to say it in very colloquial terms, is what suddenly runs up and bites you in the behind. Stuff that you didn't realize that you didn't know, and that is going to be crucial in your organization as you evolve. So the reason, this is probably, a lot of people just look at this and say, okay, so, that is sort of like reinventing, something that was already out there. We have another expression in Spanish. He's reinventing boiled water, right? So the reason that I'm bringing this up right now as a major point in my checklist, the third big question, is because you need to make decisions in your startup venture to compensate for this. Your team structure and the functioning of that team should accommodate this ambiguity. To begin with, having your structures, and I mean the social structures, the social status that you're going to have within the team, at least at the beginning, and at least in terms of the intellectual discussions that you're going to be having, they have to be really horizontal. An analyst who is doing an internship out of business school should be able to question, if you're a part of a 6, 7, 10-person team, should be able to question the CEO of the company who developed the strategy. It's really important that to manage the way that you work in your team, in order to have this horizontality, to be able to discuss things at least on the intellectual level, even though there will be a hierarchy when you have to make the decision. At least for the discussions, at least for the intellectual part, there should be very horizontal, the ability to challenge each other as equals. Now, curiosity has to become a prime value in order to find out what you don't know, and find out those things that you weren't that you weren't aware that you didn't know, but you suddenly become aware. So, having the ability to question constantly is a major part of successful teams. Now, self-critique, again, and I mentioned that in the first question, being a person who is self-critical makes it a lot easier to find out and to focus on things that you didn't know, and being humble, realizing that you didn't know everything when you started out in this journey. And also being aware that you baked in certain things that you didn't realize were assumptions. That you sort of think, well, if people have cell phones, then they will probably be checking their cell phones half the time. But you don't realize that perhaps some of the people who are your cell phones, and this goes to social entrepreneurs who work with the bottom of the pyramid, they don't realize that there will be patchy cell phone coverage where the people actually spend their evening. So they're not going to be able to watch media. So those assumptions that were already baked into my initial plans, I have to become aware of them, and I have to be prepared to make something that was fixed become variable. Okay. And finally, this is a really important part of keeping that culture. It's relatively easy to start out curious, but remaining curious, remaining a questioning organization is something that requires this basic rule. You never kill the messenger. If somebody comes up to you with bad news, or somebody really questions a central tenet of what your business plan is, take it seriously. Don't stone the person. And I mean that figuratively. Obviously, it's really important to espouse curiosity, to take these things in stride. You can, of course, say, perhaps this isn't the right moment, but then it's really important, if you're a leader in your organization, or you're the person who is leading most of the time, it's really important that you nurture questioning, that you nurture people who bring you the bad news, who aren't afraid to do so. So takeaway here is starting a company, entrepreneuring, which is, I don't know if the verb exists or anything, but for me, it's really important to realize that this is a voyage of discovery. So, are we focused on scaling transitions into, are we focused on finding out what we don't know and things that we're not aware of that we don't know? So let's look at what happens to the final question. Do we know where to find resources? I was very focused on finding those resources that I need to start my company. And that transitions into, have I set my boundaries? I think it's much more important when you're starting out to be clear on what those boundaries are for your whole team. And here, at the end of the presentation, I'll give a short list of resources. This particular question on boundaries goes to a principle of good entrepreneurship, which is revolving commitment. Good entrepreneurs are 150% committed to their companies and to their ideas and to the opportunities that they're pursuing until something happens that they realize that they shouldn't be committed. And then their commitment has to go from 150 to zero from one moment to the next. And this happens when certain boundaries are crossed. So the first question here is, what are the red lines for the team? That are those boundaries that when you cross them, your commitment goes from 150 to zero. And those red lines are going to be different for different people in the team. And you have to be comfortable with what those red lines they are. So, for example, if we go a year without funding, is that a red line for somebody in the team or not? Is a salary of so many dollars or rupees or dinars enough for a person, or is that a red line? The months of runway that you have, runway, by the way, is the time period that you can sustain your company with the money that you have in the bank right now. So is that runway 6 months, or is it a year, or is it 18 months, or is it 2 years? How comfortable are you with the uncertainty of being able to lift off the company when the runway ends? It's important that you know what those red lines are for the rest of the team. Traction milestones. Are you selling enough? What happens if we don't hit those targets? Are we going to have to close the company? Are we going to pivot? And again, you'll start getting, if you have very different definitions of what those red lines are, you're going to have a lot of conflict of the kinds that you don't want. Strategic resources, for example, partners that are important, having key clients or intellectual property. These are things that, again, you have to be aware of. Are those important to have equally important to have for all the people on the team, or are they different? And again, perhaps more important in the day-to-day management is, are your values compatible to each other? The first thing that I found was a problem for me with the partners is transparency. I am an exceedingly transparent person. I share my feelings on my sleeve a lot of the time. I manage them well, but a lot of people can see if I'm upset. A lot of people will see when I'm happy. A lot of people will get a lot of information for me. And I have partners. I actually had a partner who was a compulsive liar. Without going to those extremes, sometimes you'll be working with somebody who is a lot less transparent than you are, somebody who plays their cards close to the vest and feels that their privacy is their own concern. Again, if these things are compatible, that you're aware of what the other person is like or the other people on the team are like, and you're comfortable with that, that's important. Being elastic with the truth. What does ready to ship mean? You will feel that, okay, so the product is ready to ship, but perhaps you have a very conscientious partner who is really focused on getting things 100% ready before sending on to a client. And this elasticity of terms is really important to know among yourselves. And the commitment that you have to clients, it's very different shutting down a company that has been selling $2 objects online or books or whatever to clients who already have those, and they're all. It's very different to close down a company that has been selling that for a couple of years, compared to when you have a single corporate client who went out on a limb to hire you and whose projects depend on you, right? But the way that you and if that person is a family member, it makes it even worse. What happens when you simply run out of money and you have to close? Revolving commitment gets in the way of this, and having partners who are on the same page as you are is important. And the same thing happens with team members. How willing are you, for example, to cut your own pay in order to keep team members on board when you hit a rough patch, when you're starting to run out of money, and so forth, and even sharing ownership of the company. And finally, regulatory gray areas and ethical gray areas. Those are things that you need to be discussed. So Revolving commitment is a hard requirement of being a good entrepreneur. It really is, because what can happen is that, and it happened to me, I stayed on for 8 years at a company that I should have closed down by the third or year at the latest. And it really screws up your life. It really takes, you don't get back that time. Okay. And that is one of the most important reasons that I really wanted to give this talk. So, these are the 4 questions in the checklist and how they've transitioned. And you will perhaps notice that, there is no mention here of strategy. And a lot of people think, so what about the strategy? And so I said, okay, let's do a bonus. Do I have an idea? And as before, again, spoiler is, this really isn't the relevant question. The relevant question is, do I have a process to come up with an idea or to improve ideas? And again, the process is more important than the result, and having a good process to work my ideas. So back in the year 2000, I read this book by Michael Lewis, not a particularly good book by the standards of Michael Lewis, which was the new thing. But the reason I mention it is that it introduced me to the concept of a new thing. And there will always be a new thing, whether that be crypto or virtual reality, whatever. There will always be a new thing, and having ideas that work around the new thing is, of course, very sexy, but it's really not a success. It's really more about executing and being able to scale than about the idea itself. And when you pursue this, you have cognitive biases that are going to try to bring you down. And cognitive biases and emotional biases are just ways that human nature betrays us. And here, what I suggest, there are some listed here because of time. I'm not going to go into them, but I really suggest that you go online and look these up. Cognitive biases, emotional biases, and how they affect business decisions is really important, because you basically make decisions on the wrong kind of information because of human nature. Final point here. Some people are too scared to share because they feel that their ideas are going to be stolen. And I've seen this happen. I've actually seen it a couple of times. But a lot more companies die because they haven't been able to discuss their strategy, discuss their ideas. So obviously, you shouldn't go out there sharing everything with everybody, but don't be scared to share. Don't necessarily require people to sign you an NDA and, commit to giving you their firstborn if they share a word of what you said. That gets in the way of making good decisions. And finally, just this idea of the process being based on discovery. So you have an entrepreneur's checklist that is revised. You transition from the items on the left, which is what I started with, to the items on the right. Do I really want to do this? Do I belong in a crew yet? Am I focused on? Are we all focused in the team on what we don't know, and in discovering that? Have we set our boundaries? Are those boundaries compatible amongst ourselves? And do we have a process to improve or come up with an idea? So my points to start with, yeah, it is attractive to say that you're an entrepreneur, but it really isn't for everyone. And it really isn't for everyone at every stage of your life. So take a good look inside yourself and decide if that's for you, at least at this point of your life and in your life. And also, what kind of company is compatible with what you want to do with what you want to do today. Also, the idea, sure, the idea is important, but it's not even half of what's most important. And you know what? If you have a good team, if you have a good process, the idea will come. You will be able to build that idea. You will also need to be resilient. You will need to be gritty. But the good news here is that you can actually plan for this in the job that you are right now. You can take on commitments that make you feel uncomfortable, even set yourself up for failure by taking on something that is super hard and getting accustomed to that feeling. Really start by focusing on discovery. A lot of people focus on being super efficient in their processes. There will be a time for efficiency. Right now, when you start, you need to focus on finding out what you don't know, finding out what you're not aware that you don't know. And also work on your relationships with partners, especially by choosing the right partners, having the tough conversations to find out who you are and the way that you feel about different things. So these are a few key resources in my personal entrepreneurial journey. I on purpose I focused on not um, giving you stuff that is going to be out there in many lists. The newest on the late shift is a series of stories on Silicon Valley that, even though it was written in the 90s, it's still super relevant. You find the characters that are there. It's short stories on different kinds of characters, the entrepreneurs, the programmers, and so forth. Those continue to be relevant, 25 years later. The new thing that I mentioned before is fun, even though it isn't an insider who wrote it on Silicon Valley and takes too much of an emphasis on an entrepreneur who is also perhaps more unbalanced than others. It's important. And the third is a textbook that I actually took from Stanford, and it isn't really well regarded by a lot of people, but I found the first chapter and this particular table here, which is a summary of the first chapter, to be important. This will all be in the presentation. And finally, a surprise resource. And South Asians are going to perhaps, people from South Asia who look at this are going to say, what? This surprise resource was actually given to me by an old communist who was very close to me. When I was 7, gave me a picture frame with this surprise resource, which is over 100 years old. So, and I've taken it as a part of my life in general, but I think it's especially important as an entrepreneur. So that surprise resource is this particular poem by Rudyard Kipling. And it really is a good summary of what being an entrepreneur is about. It's keeping your head when people are literally losing, and forgive me for using the expression, but keeping your head when people are losing their shit. Trusting yourself, but not being, cocky, being able to dream and have a vision, but at the same time, not sacrificing everything for that. Being managing the highs and be able thinking that those highs will end, and managing the lows and knowing that there will be a day after is also super important. Being willing to risk and then losing, and then picking up the pieces from what you lost, learning the lessons, and then starting up again, and also being able to hold on until those thresholds that I mentioned before. And the final verse, really being able to talk to everybody, talk to the client, talk to the people in the company who are perhaps, in the parking lot taking care, because they will see your team members behave in ways that you won't be able to see them. But at the same time, being able to talk with the VCs, talk to the captains of industry, talk to government. All of these things are really important for you as an entrepreneur. And finally, just this idea that you're going to have to work your behind off, and being willing to give those 60 seconds worth of distance in order to become successful. So big recommendation, make this a part of your entrepreneurial journey. And with that, I will go on. These are Qureos social media. And I highly recommend that you follow them. The Slack channel isn't here, I see, but still signing up to that is also super valuable. And my details are again here in the presentation. So with that, Hadia, I think I ran a little over time, but we still have a few minutes for questions, and I can stay on for another 10 minutes if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Raul, just before I move on to questions, I'd really like to thank you for giving us such an insightful session. The chat box is filled with people sharing their appreciation for this session. I would love to move on to questions. And yeah, so I think Asad's question, it's a mix of two questions. So he's asking, is entrepreneurship a skill or a mindset? And the second leg of his question is like, what differentiates a good entrepreneur from a bad one?
Okay, so entrepreneur is a combination of skill and mindset, and mindsets are important. For what characteristics of mindsets are going to be really important? First of all, as I mentioned in the presentation, questioning is an important, that idea that you don't know everything, and that there's actually that you are aware that there's a lot of really important stuff that you don't know. Second is uh, having when the company starts evolving, Bob Sutton and Huggy Rao have this expression, mindset over footprint. The idea that you have a team that relies on each other, that the mindset has to be of excellence in the way that you do stuff, and feeling accountable is a key part of mindset. But also, there's a lot of skills that are really important to have. You need to be able to communicate well. You need to be able to think through problems. You're going to have to be able to think on your feet. And this doesn't necessarily have to be that you have to be the best of them, but the team does have to unite these things. So shared skills, shared mindset, being complementary are really, equally important in being an entrepreneur. What makes a good entrepreneur? The people who have the mindset and the people who have the skills. And the non-cognitive skills, being having grit, the capacity to stay focused on long-term targets through adversity, super important. I recommend another book called Why Children Succeed by Paul Tuff. That is another really good resource.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Let me just write down the book's name, Why Children Succeed. Yeah. So moving on to the next question, we have Zainab, who started her own venture. She's saying that my friend and I started an initiative, but it failed because we lost the direction. So how do you manage to handle a situation like this? Do you develop a business model before starting, or like what's the first step?
Yes. Always have a strategy and be aware that you're going to change that strategy. Always have a strategy and find out if the assumptions that are behind the strategy really are relevant, or if those assumptions are wrong. Losing focus is happens when we aren't accountable. So what does accountability mean here? And this is part of the corporate governance courses that I give for startups and scale ups. Some people feel that accountability is, having people that you have to report to. But no, the first people that you are going to have to report to are yourselves, your team, your co-founders. But, how do you do that? It's hard to, it's hard to be able to have to account to yourself. And the way that you do this is by getting things down in writing and having a process to change the strategy. So you're going to say, okay, we are going to remain focused on this population. For example, a social entrepreneur who wants to start in a community. Okay, this is the community that we're going to be serving. This is a product that we're going to be producing. And then down the line, you sort of find something else, and something that distracts you, another community, another product, another need, and you start pursuing both things at once. Okay, so you have to have a process to make those hard decisions, and being accountable to the planning at first, and then to the measurements and to the KPIs and OKRs that you set up for yourselves. That is going to be part. And who is the person who mentioned this, right?
Yeah,
I
Zainab.
think. Pardon?
Zainab mentioned this. The question.
Okay. I won't try to pronounce right now, but anyway, so I think it's really valuable that you are identifying this at this point. Take everything out. Take all of the lessons that you can from this particular failure, and put them into your next venture. Okay.
Absolutely. Great. So, since we're a little short on time, I'm just going to take the last question. Zara is also saying that she's loving this talk. And she's saying that, do you recommend a business contract being written up before any R&D takes place with your team members?
Yeah, not a business contract. It's a founder's agreement, and there are many long forms that you will find online, templates. Yes, I strongly, strongly recommend that. But also, you just use the points that are here in the presentation. I mean, at least those are the ones that I feel are the most relevant, or at least have been in my personal journey as an entrepreneur.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're just going to take one last question. We
Yeah, that
have
was.
Fatima. Yeah. So Fatima is saying that how does one navigate around so much uncertainty when beginning a piece of work of this nature?
Wow. It depends on who you are. I think it's important to have routines in place, keeping a level head and level emotions. There are many things that you can do that. Get enough sleep. Really get enough sleep. Take time off from time to time. Remain grounded in your relationships with friends. Have friends that have absolutely nothing to do with your venture. Um, meditate. Meditate. That is something that is incredibly powerful, and it will also make it incredibly useful to you, right? Again, go back to the If poem by Rudyard Kipling. You know, it really is important to have a life outside of your venture. Um, it'll give you grounding. It'll make you a better person and a more successful entrepreneur.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone who tuned in. Thank you, Raul, for giving us this beautiful and insightful talk. Everyone who's joined in, I'd like to thank all of you. Really sorry if your question wasn't answered. Thank you, Rama, Fatma, Asad, Zainab, Zara, everyone who's joined in. You guys will be seeing a lot more of Raul on the platform. I know everybody enjoyed this talk. And I'd also like to mention to the participants that, if you're a mentor or an apprentice or a business, you must visit www.qureos.com. We have a lot different exciting opportunities coming up. And Raul, that's it. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Just
Yeah.
one final tip: put yourself
Yeah.
out there. One of my brothers decided for 100 days to do something every single day that would make him feel uncomfortable. Actually do that. Hug people on the street. Whatever makes it are your non-comfort zones,
Yeah.
practice that ahead of time. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing this last bit. I think that's the most important. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Raul. Nice. This session was great, and we'll be conducting more of these workshops. Stay tuned to our page. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.